Ben Halloway drifted through the quiet corridors of Outpost Theta 9, his footsteps muffled by the artificial gravity plating beneath him. It had been 6 months since he was stationed here, a solitary human scientist on a remote research facility orbiting Valen 4, a planet covered in endless sapphire forests and silver rivers. It was breathtaking, sure, but it was also lonely. The mission was simple: observe. Valen 4 was home to an intelligent species known as the Valari, humanoid in form but ethereal in ways that defied human logic. Their society was insular, their culture a mystery, and despite decades of attempted diplomacy, no human had ever spoken directly to one. Ben sighed, rubbing his temple as he entered his small sleeping quarters. Another night, another long stretch of silence, and then he fell into someone else's dream. At first, he thought he was hallucinating. He stood in a place unlike anything he had ever seen. The sky above was a shifting mosaic of deep violets and liquid gold, alive with movement. Towers of translucent crystal spiraled upwards, bending impossibly like frozen waves. Beneath him, the ground pulsed with soft bioluminescence, illuminating a figure sitting alone on an elevated platform. A woman. Her skin shimmered in shades of amethyst, shifting slightly with the light. A cascade of silvery blue hair spilled over her shoulders, and delicate, glowing filaments extended from her temples, swaying slightly in an unseen breeze. She was painting, but not with her hands. The colors flowed directly from her thoughts, weaving images into the air like liquid light. Ben took an uncertain step forward, the dream feeling far too real. The woman turned sharply, her eyes locked onto his. A shockwave of something intimate, electric, terrifying passed between them. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. And then, Ben woke up. The following nights were not normal. Every time Ben closed his eyes, he returned to the dream. The woman was always there. She no longer painted, but instead watched him cautiously, her expression caught between curiosity and fear. Eventually, Ben dared to speak. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she replied, "Mira." Something about saying her name aloud made the dream more solid, more real. "I don't understand what's happening," Ben admitted. Neither did she. But as the nights passed, they began to piece together the impossible truth. They were sharing their dreams, not as observers, not as intruders, but as connected minds, their thoughts bleeding into each other in ways neither of their species had ever documented. Ben told her about Earth, about the emptiness of space, the crushing solitude of his mission. Mira told him about the Valari, about their rigid caste system, about how she was expected to be an artist but had no choice in the matter. "I paint because they tell me to," she admitted one night. "Not because I want to." They shared fragments of themselves, finding solace in the fact that, for the first time in their lives, someone understood them. And then, Mira vanished. Ben woke with a start. For the first time in weeks, the dream had not come. Panic surged through him. He had no way to contact Mira outside of their connection. No way to reach her on the surface of Valen 4. But then, his station's proximity alarms blared. Ben rushed to the viewport. A small Valari craft hovered just beyond the force field. A sleek, iridescent vessel unlike anything humans had ever been able to study up close. A message crackled through his station's ancient comm system, the voice cold and formal. "Human, you are in violation of interspecies psychic boundaries." Ben's blood ran cold. The Valari knew, and they were not pleased. Ben swallowed hard, his pulse hammering as he stared at the Valari vessel through the viewport. The comm crackled again. "Sever the connection immediately, or we will intervene." His hands clenched into fists. "I don't know how," he said, his voice tight. "I don't even know why this is happening." A pause. Then, the voice returned, colder this time. "That is not your concern. We are giving you a warning, human. There will not be another." The transmission cut out. The ship remained outside for a few moments longer, as if watching him, before it turned and vanished into the swirling silver clouds of Valen 4. Ben exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. They wanted the link gone. But why? And more importantly, where was Mira? For the next 3 nights, there were no dreams. Ben tried everything: meditation, sleep deprivation, even forcing himself to focus on Mira's face as he drifted off. But it was as if she had been ripped away. A slow, gnawing dread settled in his chest. Had the Velari done something to her? Had they severed the connection by force? Each night that passed without her presence felt like an ache, an absence he couldn't explain. By the 4th night, he couldn't take it anymore. He needed to go down there. Officially, human contact with the Velari was prohibited beyond scientific observation. Unofficially, Ben didn't care. The research outpost had a single pilot lander, meant for emergencies. This wasn't exactly an emergency, but to him, it was close enough. As he suited up, overriding the system protocols that warned him of unauthorized planetary entry, his mind buzzed with uncertainty. Would the Velari capture him? Would they even let him see Mira? The lander detached with a mechanical hiss, descending through Valen 4's dense atmosphere. The turbulence was rough, but after a few harrowing minutes, he broke through the clouds and saw the alien world up close for the first time. It was more breathtaking than he had imagined. The sapphire-colored forests stretched in all directions, their leaves glittering under the twin moons. Rivers of liquid silver cut through the land like veins of molten metal, and in the distance, a city, not built, but grown, great crystalline spires twisting and branching like frozen trees. The structures pulsed with faint inner light, shifting in color like breathing creatures. Mira was somewhere down there. Ben took a shaky breath, and then, from the forest below, a figure was already waiting for him. The moment Ben stepped out of the lander, he felt it. A pressure, subtle at first, then building. A presence inside his mind. He turned slowly. The figure was tall, taller than any Velari he had seen in the dreamscape. Armor-like plates of iridescent material covered their form, and their gaze burned with a cold, unsettling intelligence. Not Mira, not a friend. Ben's muscles tensed as the figure stepped forward. "You should not be here," the Velari said, their voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "You defy the will of the elders." Ben's mind raced. "I just want to see Mira. I need to." A sharp, invisible force slammed into his skull. Pain exploded behind his eyes, dropping him to his knees. His vision blurred. They were inside his head. "You do not understand," the figure murmured. "The connection is dangerous. It was never meant to be." Ben gritted his teeth. "Then tell me why." The figure tilted their head, and then a rush of images flooded his mind. Not his memories, not Mira's. Something older. A war. A time when humans and Velari had met before. When minds had linked. When something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. The connection had destroyed them. Ben gasped, staggering back, the images vanishing. The figure loomed over him. "You do not belong here, human," they said. And then, Ben felt it, his consciousness being forcibly pulled apart from the link. His vision darkened. His body collapsed. The last thing he saw was Mira, standing in the distance, her eyes wide with horror. And then, everything went black. Darkness. Then, pain. Ben's mind felt like it had been shattered and glued back together wrong. Thoughts overlapped, reality flickered, and somewhere in the chaos, he sensed a void where Mira's presence had once been. They had torn the connection away. He opened his eyes, blinking against the soft, luminescent glow of his surroundings. He was no longer outside. Instead, he lay in a chamber of living crystal, its walls shifting and pulsing like breathing veins of light. A prison. The air tasted strange, rich, heavy, charged with something that made his thoughts feel muffled, like trying to think through a thick fog. A movement caught his eye. Mira. She stood near the entrance, guarded by 2 towering Velari figures in the same iridescent armor as the one who had attacked him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, those deep, luminous pools of shifting silver, held something raw, something almost desperate. "Mira," Ben rasped. His throat felt dry, his voice foreign in his own ears. She took a hesitant step forward, but one of the guards raised a hand, stopping her. "You should not have come here," she whispered. Ben pushed himself up onto his elbows, every nerve screaming in protest. "They ripped you away," he said hoarsely. "I thought you were." She shook her head, cutting him off. "I'm alive. But they know now. They know what we are." His chest tightened. "And what is that, Mira?" She hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she whispered, "A threat?" The guards moved. Before Ben could react, they seized his arms, lifting him effortlessly to his feet. His limbs felt heavy, his mind still sluggish from whatever psychic force they had used to suppress him. Myra's hands twitched at her sides, but she didn't fight them. She only met Ben's gaze, and he could see it, the silent war waging inside her. They led him through the corridors of the crystal prison, moving deeper into the heart of the Velari city. The architecture was impossibly alien, shifting as they passed, as if the structures themselves were sentient, responding to their presence. Finally, they reached a great chamber, its ceiling lost in swirling violet mist. Ben barely had time to take in the towering figures seated in the center. The elders, before the force holding his mind in place suddenly dissolved. A flood of emotions surged through him: grief, confusion, anger. But most of all, the sudden, unbearable emptiness where Myra's presence should have been. The elders spoke without moving their lips. This connection should not exist. Ben flinched as the words echoed directly inside his skull. One of the elders, their form wrapped in layers of shifting light, regarded him with something almost like curiosity. "Do you know why?" Ben swallowed hard. "I saw something," he admitted. "A war. A past connection." The elder's light pulsed, and the air trembled. "Long ago, your kind and ours were linked." The images surged back into his mind. Human minds entwined with Velari minds, sharing thoughts, dreams, even emotions. A bridge between worlds. And then, destruction. The connection had grown too strong, too overwhelming. The humans had changed. So had the Velari. Their minds had become something other. And then, in a moment no one had anticipated, they had torn each other apart. The psychic backlash had devastated both species, leaving behind nothing but shattered memories and an unspoken law. Never again. Ben's mind reeled. "That was thousands of years ago," he said. "We're not the same people anymore." "No," one of the elders agreed. "You are not. But the connection is." A weight settled in Ben's chest. It didn't matter that he and Mira hadn't chosen this link. It didn't matter that they had only ever sought comfort in each other's presence. Their existence was a violation of the past. The elders turned to Mira now. "You understand what must be done." Ben felt something cold and final pass between them. Myra's breath hitched, and for the first time, he saw something close to fear in her expression. "No," she whispered. The elders didn't respond. Ben's pulse spiked. "What?" he demanded. "What must be done?" Mira turned to him. Her lips parted as if to speak. But then, the ground shook. A low, resonating hum filled the chamber, and for the first time, the elders' composed forms wavered. Then, a voice, cutting through the air like a blade. "The connection has already begun." A new presence materialized in the chamber. Something ancient, raw, and immensely powerful. The elders turned sharply, their light dimming in something close to alarm. Ben's breath caught. A figure stood at the far end of the chamber, emerging from the swirling violet mist. They were neither Velari nor human, but something in between. A fusion of two species, two minds, two existences that should never have been joined. Yet here they were. Their eyes locked onto Ben's, and they smiled. "You were never meant to remember," they murmured. "But now that you have, there is no going back." A sudden crack split through Ben's mind, and the link between him and Mira snapped back into place, stronger than ever. Pain, heat, power, and then the world around them began to fracture. The chamber shuddered. The crystalline walls pulsed violently, shifting between solidity and something unstable, like a mirage tearing at the seams. Ben felt his mind crack open like a floodgate, Myra's presence pouring into him. No longer a distant echo, but an all-consuming force. He gasped, his knees nearly buckling as Myra's thoughts, her emotions, her very being flooded through him. She was afraid. Not just for herself. For him. For both of them. The figure, the impossible fusion of Valari and human, tilted their head, watching with eerie amusement. Their voice was soft, almost reverent. And now, the cycle begins anew. The elders, who had remained impassive before, reacted with something close to fear. Their forms trembled, their radiance dimming. This cannot be allowed, one of them intoned. The connection is unstable. It will consume them. Ben gritted his teeth. The pressure in his skull was unbearable. His thoughts and Mira's thoughts were colliding, overlapping, twisting into something new. Mira's voice, inside his mind, was a desperate whisper. Ben, I can't stop it. The fusion being took a slow step forward, their crystalline limbs shifting like liquid light. You are beginning to understand, aren't you? They murmured. This is not the first time. Ben's breathing was ragged. Who? His voice caught. Who are you? The figure's smile deepened. I was like you once. Human. Valari. Separate. But the link does not end. It only transforms. Ben's stomach twisted. The war. The destruction. It hadn't ended in death. It had ended in this. Beings caught between, neither human nor Valari. A new entity, born of two minds converging into one. Something neither species could understand, nor control. The elders' voices trembled. This is why we severed the link. This is why we forbid it. Mira's presence surged inside him, stronger now. And for the first time, Ben felt it too. Not just her thoughts, not just her emotions, but her soul. A terrifying, exhilarating clarity overtook him. He knew what she was thinking before she even thought it. He could feel her heart pounding in sync with his own. They weren't just linked. They were becoming one. Mira's body trembled, her hands clenched into fists. Ben could feel the war within her. The fear, the longing, the raw, undeniable pull toward something she did not understand. The elders had told her this was wrong, that this connection would lead to destruction. But now, she could feel Ben, not just his words, but his very being. His memories, his thoughts, his lonely nights on Theta 9, staring at the endless void. And he could feel her, trapped within a society that saw her as nothing more than a tool, an artist bound to a fate she never chose. They were two halves of something incomplete. Mira took a slow step forward. The elders stiffened. Mira, one of them warned, if you go to him, there will be no turning back. She hesitated. Ben's voice was barely a whisper. Mira, we already crossed that line the moment we saw each other. Her breath hitched, and then, with a final, deliberate motion, she reached out and took his hand. The chamber exploded with light. The elders screamed, their voices dissolving into fractured echoes as the walls shattered outward. The fusion being laughed, their form rippling in delight as the energy surged between Ben and Mira. It wasn't just a connection anymore. It was a fusion. Their thoughts, their emotions, their very existence merged, the boundaries between them eroding until they were neither human nor Valari. Something new, something more. Ben gasped as memories he had never lived flooded through him. Mira as a child, painting the sky with her thoughts. Mira trapped in a future she never wanted. Mira looking at the stars, longing for something else. And in return, she saw him. Ben as a boy, staring at the night sky. Ben alone, thousands of miles from Earth, staring at the endless black. Ben in the dream, seeing her for the first time. Their minds spiraled together, thoughts tangling, sensations blurring. And then, they understood. This was never an accident. This was fate. The energy surged, a blinding pulse of raw, unfathomable light, and the world around them ceased to exist. When Ben opened his eyes, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He wasn't anywhere. It was a void, a space between spaces, filled with swirling colors and echoes of memories, human and Valari alike. And Mira was there. Except, she was different. Her form flickered, shifting between Valari and human, her eyes shimmering with something beyond comprehension. Ben looked down at his own hands. They were the same. Not fully human. Not fully alien. Something new. Mira's voice drifted into his mind. But this time, there were no barriers between them. Ben, this is what they feared. A shiver ran through him. The elders weren't trying to stop them because they were dangerous. They were trying to stop them because they could not control what they would become. A new species, a new mind, a bridge between two worlds that had been separate for too long. Ben reached for Mira, their hands clasping, and in that moment, the void shattered, giving way to a universe neither of them had ever seen before. A universe that was theirs to shape. The void collapsed around them. Ben felt himself falling, not through space, not through time, but through something deeper. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever known. His body was no longer separate from Mira's. Their thoughts curled together like interwoven threads, a tapestry being rewritten as they tumbled into a new reality. Then, a gasp, a first breath. The world reassembled around them. Ben and Mira stood in the ruins of the Elder's chamber. The crystalline walls, once towering and eternal, lay in jagged shards, flickering between solid and transparent states, unable to decide what they were. And the elders themselves were gone. Not dead, not vanished, just erased, as if they had never been there at all. Mira's hand trembled in his. He could feel her fear, her wonder, her understanding bleeding into him, just as his own thoughts bled into her. "We changed something," she whispered, her voice a perfect echo in his mind. Ben exhaled, testing his limbs, testing his existence. His body still felt like his, but also not. His skin shimmered with a faint iridescence, just like Mira's, but his hands were still his own. His heart still beat. Yet he felt Mira's heartbeat within him, as if they were two parts of the same being. The city around them was silent. The Velari, gone. The structures flickered, phasing in and out of existence, the very fabric of their reality unraveling. And then, a voice. Not Mira's. Not his own. Something else. "You have reached the threshold." Ben turned sharply, his pulse spiking. From the shifting haze of the broken city, something moved. Not a person, not a creature, but a presence. It had no defined form, just a rippling, shifting mass of light and shadow, pulsing like a living idea. It did not walk. It did not float. It simply was, bending the space around it like a ripple on the surface of a vast ocean. Mira inhaled sharply. "What are you?" The presence pulsed. "We are what comes next." Ben's breath hitched. Next? The bridge has been crossed. The cycle has broken. And now, you must decide. The presence expanded, surrounding them without touching them. Ben felt its weight inside his mind, pressing against thoughts that weren't entirely his own anymore. Mira's voice was in his head, trembling. "Ben, I think we've become something neither human nor Velari." He swallowed hard. "Decide what?" The presence whispered, a soundless vibration. "Which world will you reshape?" Ben felt it. The choice. Not a physical choice, not a simple yes or no. It was deeper than that. Reality itself was shifting, raw and unstable, waiting for their will to shape it. The elders had spent centuries preventing this, fearing this moment, fearing that a human and a Velari, once connected, would become something neither species could control. And now, here they stood, with the power to remake everything. Mira's hand tightened around his. "We can fix this," she whispered. "We can undo what was broken." Ben frowned. "Fix what?" She turned, her silver eyes burning with something new. "The war. The division between our species. The reason we were never supposed to meet." The presence pulsed. A world united. For a brief moment, Ben saw it. Humans and Velari, no longer separate, no longer afraid of each other. A future where their minds could merge without fear, where their civilizations intertwined, where they were no longer bound by the limitations of their past selves. A new species, a new way of existing. But then, another vision, a warning. He saw minds tangled together too tightly, thoughts losing distinction, identities dissolving into one consciousness. No more individuals. No more Ben. No more Mira. Just one being, stretching across time and space, until it was all that remained. Ben jerked back, his heart pounding. Mira's eyes widened as she saw the same vision. "No," she whispered. "That's not what I want." The presence shuddered. Then you must choose differently. Ben clenched his jaw. What if we let go? Mira froze. What? He turned to her, voice steady. What if we end it? The connection, the link, everything. The presence wavered, as if considering. To undo what has been done is to erase what you have become. Mira flinched. You mean, we'd go back to being human in Valari? If you can. A heavy silence fell between them. Ben could feel Mira's thoughts, her longing, her fear, her uncertainty. She had spent her whole life feeling trapped by her people's traditions, and now she was more than what they ever allowed her to be. And Ben, he had been alone for so long, and now, for the first time, he wasn't. But were they still themselves? Or were they just becoming something neither of them understood? Mira's voice trembled in his mind. Ben, what if we can never go back? He swallowed. Then we have to decide, do we move forward, not knowing what we'll become? Or do we end it before we lose ourselves completely? Mira stared at him. The presence pulsed once more, its voice a whisper of infinity. You must choose. And the universe waited. Ben could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the sheer magnitude of what they were about to decide. The universe, the very fabric of reality itself, was waiting for their answer. Mira's fingers trembled in his grip, her mind an open book to him now, pages unwritten yet inevitable. He could feel her thoughts, her fear, her longing, the deep ache of uncertainty. They had already crossed a boundary no human or Valari had before. They had become something new. But was it truly them? Or were they losing themselves in the process? The presence surrounding them stirred, shifting like a storm barely contained. You hesitate, it murmured, but the cycle cannot hold. A choice must be made. Ben's jaw tightened. And what if we don't choose? The presence shuddered, as if the question itself was unnatural. Then you will become what the first ones became. Something neither of your kind can comprehend. Something that will consume everything you were, until nothing remains but the link itself. A cold dread settled into his chest. Mira turned to him, her silver eyes wide. He could feel her reaching for an answer, just as he was. And then, she whispered, Ben, we have to let go. His breath caught. She was right. If they continued merging, they would lose what made them who they were. If they embraced this new existence, there would be no Ben, no Mira, just a new entity, a fusion neither human nor Valari, something beyond both. Maybe something beautiful, maybe something horrifying. But either way, they would no longer be themselves. Ben squeezed her hand. How? Mira's voice was fragile in his mind. I think we have to break the link ourselves, before it consumes us. The presence pulsed. Once undone, you will never feel each other again. A sharp pain twisted inside Ben's chest at those words. Never? Never again? He turned to Mira. She already knew what he was thinking, and she was just as afraid as he was. They had come to rely on this connection, not just as an anomaly, but as something deeper, something essential. They had shared more than just thoughts. They had shared themselves, and now they were about to rip that away. Mira swallowed hard. Ben, will you still remember me? His throat tightened. I don't know. Her breath shuddered, and she closed her eyes. Then promise me, if we meet again, even if we don't remember, promise me you'll find me. Ben felt his heart break. He lifted his hand, pressing his forehead against hers, feeling the last, lingering threads of their shared mind pulsing between them. I promise. And then, they let go. The universe shattered. The presence howled, a deafening, endless sound that was neither pain nor anger, but something beyond human comprehension. Ben felt himself ripped apart, the connection between him and Mira snapping like an overstretched tether. For one agonizing moment, he felt everything. Her thoughts, her fears, her last, lingering warmth. And then, nothing. The silence was worse than the pain. Ben collapsed to his knees, gasping. His mind his own again, and only his own. The vast, endless link that had tethered him to Mira was gone, leaving behind an absence so profound that for a moment, he thought he might break under the weight of it. He reached out blindly, but there was nothing left to reach for. Mira was gone. Not dead, not erased, Just gone. Separate. Alone. And the universe stood still. When Ben awoke, he was back on Outpost Theta 9. The sterile hum of the station's systems filled the air, familiar yet foreign after everything he had experienced. For a moment, he thought it had all been a dream. Then he tried to remember Mira. A sharp pain stabbed through his mind, as if something vast and vital had been ripped away. He could still recall the feeling of her presence, but the details, the dreams, the moments they had shared, were slipping through his fingers like sand. His memories of her were fading. Panic surged through him. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to hold on to what little he could. Her name, her eyes, the way she had looked at him just before they had let go. Don't forget. Don't forget. A chime echoed through the outpost. Ben exhaled shakily, rubbing his face, trying to focus on his surroundings. The monitors displayed normal readings. The Valari city below was gone, as if it had never existed. No trace of the elders. No trace of the impossible fusion being. No trace of Mira. He clenched his fists. Then, slowly, he turned to the station's viewport, staring down at Valen 4, its sapphire forests stretching endlessly below. She was still out there. Somewhere. She had to be. Ben closed his eyes, whispering the only words that still mattered. I'll find you. The stars outside remained silent. But somehow, he knew they were listening. The days blurred into weeks. Ben remained at Outpost Theta 9, carrying out his research like before, but something fundamental had changed. The connection was gone. The presence in his mind, the warmth of Mira, was nothing but a phantom ache, an absence so profound it felt like a missing limb. He couldn't hear her thoughts, couldn't feel her emotions, and with every passing day, his memories of her continued to fade. At first, he had fought it. He had written down every detail he could recall. Her silver eyes, the way her thoughts had felt against his, the sound of her voice. But no matter how hard he tried, some pieces simply vanished. It was as if the universe itself was erasing what had happened. Had they really broken something that was never meant to be touched? Or had the elders built failsafes long ago to make sure no one ever remembered? Ben sat alone in the outpost's main observation deck, staring down at Valen 4. The planet was as beautiful as ever, but something was missing. The crystalline cities, the bioluminescent spires, all gone. The world below looked untouched, like a planet that had never known civilization. Had the Valari erased themselves? Or had something else rewritten them? Erased them from history altogether? A shiver crawled up his spine. No one would believe what had happened. He could barely believe it himself. But deep down, even as the memories faded, one truth remained. Mira had been real. And if she had survived, if she was out there, somewhere, he would find her. 1 month passed. Then 2. Then 3. By now, Ben's logs barely mentioned Mira anymore. When he read his old entries, her name felt distant, like something from a half-remembered dream. He had stopped writing about her altogether, until the signal arrived. It was faint, just a small anomaly buried in the data from the planet's surface, a pulse of energy unlike anything recorded before. Ben almost dismissed it, but something about it felt familiar. His pulse quickened. He ran the signal through the station's decryption programs, his hands moving on instinct. Minutes passed. Then, a single phrase appeared on the screen. Words written in a language that should not exist. Words he should not have recognized. But he did. Ben. I remember. His breath caught. For the first time in months, he felt something break through the silence. A whisper, a presence. Not fully there, but reaching. Mira. She was out there. And she still remembered. Ben's fingers tightened around the console. Whatever had happened to her, whatever had happened to the Valari, the universe hadn't erased everything. They had severed the link, but something still remained. And now, for the first time since losing her, he had a direction, a trail, a single message carried across the void. She was waiting for him. Ben exhaled sharply, a slow, determined grin spreading across his face. Hold on, Mira, he murmured. I'm coming. Outside the station, the stars burned brighter than ever before. Ben couldn't breathe. He stared at the message flashing on his screen, his mind racing, trying to grasp the impossible. Ben. I remember. His hands hovered over the console. He should have called it an anomaly, dismissed it as a glitch. But he knew better. This was her. Somehow, against all odds, Mira was reaching out. But how? The link between them had been severed. They had felt it break, felt their minds split apart as reality itself rejected what they had become. Yet here was proof that it hadn't been erased completely. His fingers moved instinctively, sending a return transmission. Mira? Where are you? The message vanished into the vast silence of space. Seconds passed, then minutes. Ben clenched his fists, his heart pounding. What if she didn't respond? What if this was all the universe would allow? Just a whisper in the dark, a cruel fragment of a connection that could never be restored. But then, the screen flickered, and a new message appeared. I don't know where I am, but I know you're out there. I can feel you. Ben exhaled sharply, gripping the edges of his chair as a wave of something familiar surged through him. Not a voice, not a direct thought, but an echo. It wasn't the same as before. The effortless, flowing connection they had once shared was gone. But something remained, something fragile and distant, like a signal bouncing across time and space, barely holding on. Ben took a deep breath. She was out there, and that meant one thing. He had to find her. Ben wasted no time. He ran the signal through every analysis tool available in Outpost Theta 9 systems. Wavelengths, frequency shifts, power fluctuations, anything that could give him a trace of where she was transmitting from. But something was wrong. The data was unstable. Every time he ran the scan, it gave different results, as if the signal wasn't coming from a fixed point, but from multiple places at once. That wasn't possible. Unless... His breath caught. What if she wasn't just lost in space? What if she was lost in something else? Something between realities? Ben leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Shit. He had felt it when they severed the link, the raw, terrifying force of the presence that had spoken to them, the entity that had called itself what comes next. What if Mira hadn't just been separated from him? What if she had been pulled somewhere else? A place that shouldn't exist? The thought sent a chill down his spine. And yet, she still found a way to reach him. If Mira could do that, then he would find a way to reach her, even if it meant going to places no human had ever gone before. 3 hours. That's how long it took before he finally isolated something useful in the signal. A repeating pattern buried beneath the transmission. A subtle distortion in space itself. A fluctuation so faint that the station's instruments had nearly ignored it as background noise. But it wasn't noise. It was a location. Ben's stomach twisted as he studied the readings. It wasn't anywhere on Valen 4. It wasn't anywhere near Valen 4. It was somewhere outside the mapped sectors of known space. A rift. The signal was coming from the edge of what human astronomers had once classified as a spatial anomaly. A place where the laws of physics broke down, where deep space probes had gone missing without explanation. No one had ever dared to go near it. No one had ever come back. And that's where Mira was. Ben exhaled, staring at the coordinates on his screen. He had a choice. He could report this, wait for Earth Command to analyze it, send a team, years from now, if ever. Or he could go after her himself. The answer was obvious. Ben had already lost Mira once. He wasn't going to lose her again. His decision was made. He stood, moving to the outpost's emergency shuttle bay. The Scythe, a small, long-range vessel, sat in its docking clamps, powered down but ready. It wasn't built for deep space anomaly exploration. It wasn't equipped for entering the unknown. But Ben didn't care. He punched in the coordinates, overriding the outpost's safety protocols. The engines roared to life. The rift was waiting. And on the other side, Mira. As the Scythe lifted off, the stars outside blurred, stretching into infinity. Ben Holloway plunged into the unknown. The Scythe hurtled through space, the engines burning with a relentless fury as Ben neared the rift. The anomaly loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of darkness and light, a tear in the fabric of reality that pulsed with chaotic energy. Ben's heart pounded as he stared into the impossible void. It felt like staring into the edge of existence itself, a place that had no beginning or end. This was where Mira was, and he would bring her back. He gripped the controls, forcing the ship forward despite the violent gravitational forces pulling him in. Alarms blared, warning him of hull stress, but he ignored them. The rift opened, and the scythe slipped through, plunging into the unknown. A kaleidoscope of fractured reality surrounded him. Colors he had no name for twisted and churned, flashes of alien landscapes flickering by. Ben's senses reeled, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He wasn't in normal space anymore. This was a place between dimensions, a liminal void where the rules of reality no longer applied. A voice echoed through the chaos. Ben. It was faint, but unmistakable. "Mira!" he shouted, gripping the controls as he pushed deeper into the shifting void. A shimmering thread of light appeared before him, faint but steady, a path. It pulsed with familiar energy, like the echo of their broken connection. He followed it, guiding the scythe through the swirling madness, feeling Mira's presence growing stronger with every second. Then, the void parted, and he saw her. Mira stood on a crystalline platform suspended in an endless expanse of stars. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, her eyes wide with shock and relief as she saw the scythe appear. Ben leapt from the ship, gravity shifting beneath him as he crossed the platform's surface. "Mira!" She turned, her eyes filling with tears. "You came." Their hands met, and for a brief, blinding moment, the link between them reignited. They were whole again. Thoughts and emotions flowed freely, two halves of a connection that had been shattered but never truly destroyed. "I remembered," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his, even when it hurt. "I knew you'd find me." Ben cupped her face, their foreheads touching. "I promised you, didn't I?" Mira smiled faintly, but a shadow passed over her features. "We can't stay here, Ben. This place." The platform trembled beneath them, reality itself unstable. "If we stay too long, we'll become part of it," she said. "Like the others who were lost here." Ben nodded. "Then let's go home. Together." The path of light reappeared, a fragile bridge leading them back to the scythe. But the void wasn't ready to let them go. Dark shapes slithered through the chaos, hungry for their connection, drawn to the spark of humanity and Valari within them. Ben's grip tightened on Mira's hand. "Run!" They sprinted across the platform, the darkness closing in. Shadows whispered in alien tongues, clawing at their memories, their identities. But their bond held, stronger than fear, stronger than the void's pull. They reached the scythe, and Mira's presence surged into the ship systems, guiding it forward with a burst of pure, focused energy. The rift's exit loomed ahead, a pinprick of light in the endless darkness. The void howled as they approached, desperate to keep them trapped. But together, they broke through. The scythe emerged from the rift, tumbling into normal space. The stars reappeared, sharp and clear, and Valen 4's sapphire forests glowed below. Ben slumped in his chair, breathless, and turned to Mira. She stood beside him, no longer a memory or a dream, real and whole and alive. They had made it. The link between them remained, faint but steady. A bridge between two worlds, a connection forged through pain and impossible odds. "Where do we go now?" Mira asked softly. Ben smiled, reaching for her hand. "Anywhere we want." Together, they set a course, leaving the past behind and venturing into the unknown. Two beings bound by fate, forging a future where human and Valari would never be divided again. As the stars stretched before them, Ben and Mira knew one thing for certain. They had defied the cycle. They had found each other, and no force in the universe could ever break that bond again.